Read a story the other day of a woman who was enjoying the good weather, and she was sitting out in her driveway, just enjoying the good weather, sitting there in her lawn chair. And this happens all the time in my neighborhood because a lot of the neighbors are retired folk. And on any good weathered afternoon, you can find people sitting in their driveways, and then the rest of the neighbors just come and gather around, bringing their lawn chairs, and they'll be there for a couple of hours. And every once in a while I get to go over, and because they're still there. So I know what this woman was like. She was there enjoying the good weather and maybe waiting to see who would come by to visit. And as she sat there, this car drove slowly up and stopped outside at the end of the driveway. And this person that she didn't know got out of the car and started walking with purpose up to her house and just walked right into the garage. And she was kind of dumbfounded and you couldn't even speak. And she watched, and the person kind of looked around at everything in the garage and finally turned around and came out and said, "This isn't the house with the garage sale, is it?" and walked away. The story goes on to say that the woman, kind of taken aback by this incident, turned and looked at her garage herself. And there in the garage were old tires that were still practically good, and there was a lot of electronic equipment that they got new and replaced it. It still worked, but it was out in the garage covered up. There were boxes of books. There were 3 big tubs of old towels and diapers from when they had kids 20, 30 years ago. And all these bicycles and weed eaters, 2 or 3, there's an electric one and a gas one and all these different kinds. And she thought, oh, maybe it is a garage sale. And she was impressed with how much she had, and she was disappointed with how much they had. You know that there are millions of storage units in this country? Millions of storage units in this country. And we all go and rent someplace because we keep filling up our house and it gets full, but we still want to buy new things. And so we take the others and we rent a storage unit and pay for a place to store the things that we're not using so much so that we can still go out and buy new things because we like to buy. We like to buy. I had a friend who was an architect, and he was chairman of the board at Broadway Christian Church in Wichita, Kansas, when I served there. And he always said that he lived in a constipated house. Everything comes in and nothing goes out. And I can identify with that, as I imagine most of us here can. It's something that we're really caught up in, buying, acquiring, purchasing. I mean, I can go in my closet and get thoroughly embarrassed by the number of shirts I have. And I go in there and say, gosh, I have nothing to wear. And it's only because nothing there is appealing to me at the moment. It's not that I have nothing to wear. And then I can start feeling guilty over all the people that I've heard of who have nothing to wear. And here I am hoarding all these shirts. You know what topic Jesus talks about in the Bible more than any other topic? What? Have any ideas? Pardon?
Love.
Love. All in favor of love? What else do you think Jesus might talk more about? Because it isn't love.
Give away all you have and follow.
Give away all you have and follow? That's getting close. Huh? Greed? That's even closer. Because it involves money. Jesus talks more often about money than any other thing in the Bible. I was reading one resource this week that said there are thousands. I haven't counted, but I believe that there are probably that many, because Jesus is always talking about money. Parables, stories about what happens, widows losing a coin and how it affects them, that their whole life gets centered around finding that coin. And they search and they clean and they search until they find it, because that's the most important thing in their life. The most popular topic that Jesus talks about is money. Money. It's not even salvation. It's not even loving God. It's not none of these things that we would think of, because Jesus knows our stumbling blocks. Jesus knows what we put first in our lives. And what takes up most of our thinking and most of our time is money. Is money. And so there it is, talked about over and over. And so in our scriptures today, in the Gospel of Luke, Jesus talks about telling another parable, because this person came up to Jesus and said, "Master, I want you to tell my brother, who has received the inheritance, to divide it with me." Jesus, would you go tell him to do the right thing and divide it with me? And Jesus looked at this person like, "You don't get it, do you?" This isn't what I'm here for. I'm not talking about being rich in this world. And let me tell you a story. And he tells us the story about the guy with the big barns and the wonderful crop, and how he ran out of room to store the crops. And so he thought, what shall I do? And the core here is, what shall I do? I will tear down these barns. I will build new barns. I will fill them with my abundance of grain and my wealth in grain. And I will live happily the rest of my days. Retirement will not be a problem. And I will enjoy my wealth. What's wrong with that story?
Doesn't share.
It what?
He doesn't share.
He doesn't share. What'd you say, Karen? The big eye. I like that. The big eye gets in there. He doesn't share. And that's what goes on in our world all the time. Everything we do is about me. Not everything. But the predominant things that we're worried about are things that affect me. Things that affect me. And what am I going to do about this? And we get upset because I can't think of what to do. I don't know what to do. How many times have you gotten into a situation and you say, this is really bothering me because I don't know what to do? I can't come up with the answer. I have tried and tried and tried. I have given all myself through this situation. I have loved the people involved in this situation, and now I don't know what to do. Nothing's working. It's because we let this I business get in our way. We let this I business get in our way when we think that we live in this world all by ourselves. And what Jesus was talking about in this parable, as he was talking to the guy who wanted the Son of God to take care of his business matters, what Jesus is saying is, this isn't about I. This is about us. This is about me and God's children. This is about what we need to be doing with each other, for each other, about each other. And we have these talks on money by Jesus all the time. And you know what every one of them is about? How money becomes an idol for us. And it begins to rule everything about us. It's not that money is evil, and it's not that there's evil about people who have a lot of money. And it's not that there's evil about people who don't have money. The poor. They're not evil. The rich aren't evil. But they both have responsibilities. They both have responsibilities. The rich, the poor, and all the people in between have responsibilities to look out for one another. To look out for one another. And who gives the most to other people? The poor. The poor. That just doesn't make sense to me. But when we get down to the poor, and that's what happens in all the parables that Jesus tells to us about money, is that those who are poor give more to take care. And I'm not talking about just percentages. I'm talking about they're more generous than other people in Jesus' stories. And I wonder, why does Jesus continue to tell us these? And why is it that maybe this is true, that the poor are more generous than the rich? It's because when you ain't got nothing, you just as well share it with someone else who ain't got nothing, because then you ain't got nothing together. Except that other person. Except that other person. I had a friend who was afraid of heights, and he and his sister went up to the state fair, and the sister wanted to ride in the Ferris wheel. You know, and this was back in the old days, so those Ferris wheels weren't very high, you know, but they went up and their feet weren't on the ground anymore. And they got up to the top, and of course the Ferris wheel stops. You know, and they're stuck up there in their fear and in their worry and in their wondering, what's going to happen to us? And his sister looks over to him and says, at least we're going to die together. And even in their facing of death, they thought, well, the good thing here is that we're going to do it together. We're going to be dead together. You know, that's looking for the good points and everything. But I have been with very poor people, and what's the first thing they do if you go into their house? They offer you something. They offer you something to eat or drink. And I don't know about you, but the first time that happened to me in the inner city of Wichita, Kansas, I went in and I was met by a young woman and 3 children living in this empty shell of a house. There was nothing in it as far as furniture. There were a couple of mats on the floor where they each slept. And I was there to bring them groceries and to see how much their gas bill was so that we could keep the gas on in their house through the winter. Because that was my job at the church I worked. And so I walked in. This was the first time I had done this. And I walked in and I was shocked. I was shocked by the extreme absence of things in this house. Nothing in this house. And I walked in, and in my dumbfoundedness, I suddenly heard this young mother saying, "Can I get you a glass of water? Can I get you a glass of water?" She wanted to give something. She wanted to know that she had worth and had something to give. And plus, she knew that it was hot September, October day. Winter was coming, but it was hot. And she was aware of that, and that I was sweating, and she offered me some water. I almost cried right then and there. Because here was this woman who was trying to take care of 3 kids and living on nothing. And she saw me come into the door, and the first thing she thought of is, what can I do to help this person? You know, that's what Jesus is talking about so often in our scriptures when he's talking about money. It's not what it can do for me. It's what it can do for us. When we talk about community of the disciples, the community of the apostles, the community of the early church, they came together not to take care of themselves and to show off their new clothes and one of the 27 shirts they have in their closets. They came to church in order to make sure everybody in their community had something to eat and drink and had enough to live on the next week, through the week. And that's what they got together for. And to give thanks to God for what they had. We are so often sidetracked. We are so often sidetracked by what we need. And, you know, as interesting as it is that what Jesus talks about more than anything else is money, it's one of the last things we think of when we want to give a gift. Unless it's to a graduate, you never know what to give them, so you give them a card with money in it. But money, and then it's $10 or $20. What if we thought, wow, this person's going off to college. I know how expensive college is. I'm going to offer to send them $20 every month. I'm going to offer to send them $100 every month. I'm going to offer to pay their first year's tuition. Have you ever thought that? No, none of us probably have. But what if we did? You know, we hear politicians talking about free education. Well, the government might not have to worry about that if each of us took on at least one more student to help through school. Or if each of us took on 4 students to pay part of their schooling, we probably wouldn't have to worry about kids graduating with debt. But Jesus tells us the thing that is most tempting to all of us is money. And it can get in our way. It gets in our way of the joy of life, but more importantly, it gets in the way of our joy of being God's child. Of being God's child. It gets in the way of us understanding how wonderful it is to be able to see someone come up to you and be able to give them something. Want a stick of gum? You know, would you like a mint? Would you like, you know, do you need a hug? These things we always want to give something because it makes us feel good and it helps the community of God. It helps the community of God. And Jesus says almost every time after he talks about money, don't center your life on the riches of this earth, but center your lives on the riches of God. On the riches of God. And they are not the things that you can pick up and hold in your hand that you can buy at the store. They are not the things that at the end of the day you sit and look around and say, oh, I love my house. I'm so thankful to have a bed. You don't know how long I have looked forward today to crawling into this bed. It's not those things. It's the things like we had the opportunity today to listen to one of our friends who was having a hard time. And we got to share heart stories with them. We got to listen to the things on TV that are happening in other parts of the world, and we got to be able to be touched by that and go out and share that story with the people around us to help others feel that story and the need. I got to stand and hold someone's hand because they were hurting, and there was nothing else we could do but stand there and be together. That's being rich toward God. I got to help walk 100 miles today to raise money for people with Alzheimer's. And at the end of the walk, over hill and dale, and sweating and puffing and all these things, I made it to the end. And I was worn out, exhausted, and spent. But I know I helped someone. I know I helped someone. I think even feels better than going out and buying another shirt. I think that even feels better than going out and thinking that I'm tired of this hand mixer. I want a good old KitchenAid sitting on my counter. Guilty. It feels better than going out and buying Christmas gifts for people who have everything. It feels better than having to know that if you're going to a party, you have to take a gift. You know what thrilled me this week? My granddaughter turned 8 and had a birthday party on Friday, a pool party in their development. And so Lee and I couldn't get together all day on Friday to call her and wish her a happy birthday. So Saturday morning, we called to wish her a happy birthday. And in that, we said, how was your party? And she said, it was really fun. I had 20 people there. And we said, oh, we bet you got lots of gifts. And she said, no, it was a gift-free party. It was just fun to get together with my friends and swim. And I wanted to say, there is hope. There is hope in this world. And for the next generation, and in the generations to come, to realize money isn't everything. Gifts aren't everything. And preaching isn't either, and I've done enough of it this morning. But that's what Jesus talks about, is money and what we can use it for the good of humankind. So don't feel guilty if when you go to the bank and you go see Phil and you say, Phil, how many millions do I have today? That's okay. But don't let those millions keep you from seeing the world around you and what God is putting in front of you and the needs of people that would love for you to share that. Amen.